airspaces all the time, restricted airspace. If you were going to test equipment...
I think this was in international waters.
Yes. Yeah, it was. But it was still off the coast of San Diego, where they do these things, which is why the fighter pilots were there in the first place.
But it's not restricted. I mean, the Russians could fly there.
Right, not that area, but isn't the area off the East Coast where some of those things restricted?
I don't know.
Okay.
The one around Long Island
China's
Long Island is restricted.
It says China's electronic war gadget turned small drones into flying stadium on radar.
So this is an article from January of this year, and then I'll show you something else I found from
Wow, so they can make it look like a flying saucer.
The size of an iPad can make it look like as big as a sports stadium.
Whoa, look at this. The effect, similar to a giant flying saucer suddenly materializing in midair, would be reminiscent of a scene of a science fiction film, but is achievable according to a peer-reviewed paper published on January 8th. Whoa.
They just also, so then the month before that, here's their new stealth fighter that's painted with the stuff you just said that scatters the frequencies.
I'm not, this isn't my field.
Cool. This is just something I stumbled across typing in the words he was saying.
Yeah, just pretty cool.
So they're testing this too.
What I was getting at was, if you're the United States government, if you're the military, and you have this kind of equipment and you want to test it, what better way than to test it on people that don't know you're testing it on them? Send your fighter jets out there, have them encounter these things, run your whatever experiment you're doing with making something appear and reappear and take off and come in, give them these signals, give them these deceptive signals, and see whether or not the problem is they had visual confirmation of these things. That's the real problem. The problem is they actually saw these things. Like the Tic Tac was, they visually saw it. 4 people, right?
I have a colleague in Silicon Valley who's been a distinguished Army career, and he told me that there were, in fact, tests of especially nuclear facilities, not necessarily the military, but mostly the military facilities, to test the ability to penetrate the perimeter. So those flights are not cleared with the people who manage the plant. So it's either a nuclear plant that makes fuel for bombs, or it's a base where nuclear weapons are stored, and there are guys around the perimeter with machine guns, and they are going to sound an alert if they see something coming over the fence. Well, suppose you come over the fence looking like a flying saucer. Are they going to start shooting or not? Okay.
Wow.
So he told me that he had actually flown some of those missions. And I know another member of a BAS team who confirmed that, told me he had been on some of those missions. They make their plane look like they put lights around it, and so that it can look like a flying saucer essentially, or look like what would be a UFO to the guard.
Right.
So that the guard they want to see if they can penetrate, if you can disguise yourself to the extent that psychologically you can inhibit the reaction of the guards and you can fly over the fence. Because if you can fly over the fence, you're in.
Right.
You can do a lot of damage.
Wow. So pretend you're a UFO.
So those are, but I don't think they do hundreds of those. I think they probably do it, very carefully at a couple of places.
But it's interesting that they have that ability. That's fascinating. That throws a lot of this stuff into question. Like, what are we actually seeing?
Yes.
But it doesn't explain all these things. And that's the problem that I always have, is just the abundance of encounters and how similar a lot of them are. And then what it must feel like. I've never had an experience, but what it must feel like to have that experience. That you probably would be I wouldn't be reluctant, because I'm a known person to talk about silly things, But if you're not, if you're like a serious person, you have some sort of an encounter, I would imagine there's a lot of pressure on you to not tell people. If you're a lawyer or a doctor or you're any sort of like respectable person that's a serious individual in whatever you're doing for a career, you don't want people to associate you with nonsense or think that, oh, maybe Mike is losing his mind.
You can't, because you have people relying on your ability to...
So maybe you tell your friends, maybe you tell your mother, maybe you tell your wife, but you probably don't tell the press. If you're a scientist, I would imagine... out, or you're a person like yourself that's been very brave for all these years, because you were talking about this stuff in the 1960s, which is pretty crazy.
Well, I had seen essentially a flying saucer when I was 15. So
can you describe it?
I was in I grew up in a town that's about 45 minutes out of Paris, on the road to Normandy. And my father was a judge in that town for a while. And beautiful afternoon in the summer. I don't know the exact date. It would have been late June or July. 1955. So I was about 15, 16. I was still in school, and then the following year I was going to go to the university. And my mother called me. I was working with my father, who was relaxing, doing some furniture, and I was helping him. And I heard my mother call from the yard, and I went down and saw an object that was absolutely a saucer. It looked like it was over the steeple of there's a cathedral there, and we were about half a kilometer away from it. And it was just suspended. It was silver, and there was a clear dome on top of it. And we both saw that. It was very clear. And then the next day I asked a friend of mine from school, who was, we were the two good students in physics and so on. And I told him I had seen that. And he said he had looked at it with binoculars. He had seen it too. And he had looked at it with binoculars, and I got him to draw it, and he drew exactly what I had seen, essentially a lens-shaped thing with a dome, a clear dome on top.
How long did you see it for?
I saw it for less than a minute. I think I went inside. I don't remember what I did. Logically, I probably went inside to get my father so that he could see it.
And then when he came out, it was gone?
He didn't even come out. He said it was probably one of the new planes that were flying around, because this was a time when the meteors and the early jets were being tried, and they were training pilots with them and so on, and both for civil aviation and for the Air Force in France. So said, well, let's wait, maybe this will be disclosed at some point. So I didn't say anything about it. Also, I'm the son of a judge. Family of a judge isn't supposed to see strange things in the air over the town.
Right.
So it was sensitive.
What year was this? When you were 15? How old are you now?
It was 1955.
1955. So back then...
I was 15, 16.
Okay, so we could also apply that, like, if it was a jet, it would probably be very loud.
Well, and also it wouldn't just stand there.
Right, it wouldn't be able to just
So,
sit there. And was this thing quiet?
After that, I understood that it was. After that, I worked at Paris Observatory after I had my degree in astronomy, tracking satellites. We tracked the very early satellite. Office, so people were writing to us with what they had seen, and most of it we could explain. For one thing, they were seeing echo, and they were seeing some of the Russian rockets, and so we would write back. I mean, we had to write back to the French citizen. I had a card with the French flag on it, and we were serving the population, so we would explain those things pretty much the way they do now. You've seen the moon rising through the fog, or you've seen satellite, so much alpha 23. But then there were cases where just like that, they saw something we could not explain. But then we would tell them, but we wouldn't publish it. We wouldn't send it anywhere. For one thing, it wasn't our job. Our job was tracking satellites.
Right, but that one experience that you had when you were 15 is what ignited your interest in this for so many years. Yeah. Well, if you hadn't been doing, I mean, the thing that's very important about people like yourself is that you're so careful in how you document these things and the conclusions that you draw. Because I think this field of UFO study is filled with so many people that claim to have answers, claim to know things, and this is going to happen, and this is Yeah.
And I think ufologists in general, they want disclosure, but we don't know. I'm very respectful of, when I had clearances, I was just very respectful of those clearances because there are people who know what's on the other side of that. There was one case in the Air Force files that was classified, and it was marked in the index with a star, and I'm punching the card and I put an asterisk there, and I had to ask Dr. Hynek, what happened, can you tell me what happened there? And he said, yeah, I can. There was enough time that I can tell you. This came from a woman in Alaska called the Air Force because she saw what she thought was the flying saucer, certainly something that should not have been there. It was dark on the ground, but the sky was still light, and there was definitely a light that looked like it was under power, that was flying west. Now, west of Alaska, there's the Korai Peninsula and there's the Soviet Union. So she thought it was a UFO. Okay? So it was reported as a UFO, but it was classified and it was called unidentified. Well, that was an inside joke. It was a U-2. But this was at sunset and the U-2 was illuminated by the sun. U-2 is painted in such a way that it shouldn't be visible from, but there are some conditions where we're going to see it. And so it was classified, and if you had the clearance, you would read that it was unidentified. It would be listed in the statistics as unidentified.
But it was actually
exactly what it was from the beginning.
Interesting. So some things are listed as unidentified because it's so classified.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I have no problem with that.
Right.
But tell me if you ask me to write a computer program about it. Tell me if it's worth my time or not.
What was your take on the Ryan Graves stuff? Like Ryan Graves and the fighter pilots that started seeing these squares within a sphere.
To me, that's still a question, and the people I talk to are still wondering, what is that? There are strange physical systems that are floating around to gather faint signals, and they have very strange shapes. Okay? So it could be, those are balloons within balloons with little things attached to them, going back to the days of 1947, looking for atomic explosions, Russian. That's the way the Russian tests, atomic tests, were detected first, was balloons that had large antennas, that were...
The thing about the Ryan Graves stuff, though, is the physical characteristics, like in the way it moves. That these things were able to stay stationary in 100+ knot winds.
I don't know.
You don't know. Yeah.
I have not researched it, and I wouldn't be the guy to research it.
If we are being visited, how many different civilizations do you think are visiting us? Because if there's all these different characteristics that these beings have, if some of them look like tall, albino, almost like human beings with large eyes, some of them look like the Greys, some of them look like dwarfs.
Yes, and that's an embarrassment of riches.
Right.
Of course, that opens a question. Is it a simulation? Hazelwood has published a couple of books about that. He's a friend of ours, and Dr. Nolan, and we had many conversations about that. We could be living in a simulation of sorts, where the people running the simulation might send whatever they want. It would be like a video game.
Right.
So all of a sudden you've got a new... But that's not completely... You can only go so far. In fact, first reaction is, well, but look at the detail. We can't reproduce a detail on that scale. That's true, but wait 10 years and we'll be able to do it. Quantum computing.
Right.
So that's not a good argument. It's it's an okay argument now, but it doesn't stand the test. The other argument is, who would be doing it and why? That's true that there are some strange things. The fact that the moon is exactly the size to hide the sun.
Yeah.
It's exactly
perfectly
30 minutes of arc,
Yeah.
like the sun. So it gives us total eclipses, and it gives us a measuring tool. The Greeks knew roughly how far the sun was with respect to the moon. They knew the ratio of the distances. They didn't get the exact distance, but they already knew that because they had done the math, the geometry. So that's pretty strange,
And it also protects our environment.
and
by
there are
keeping
lots
us
of things
stable.
on Earth that seem to be accidental, that are just right for us to exist.
Yeah.
So, well, but I'm not completely happy with that explanation.
Nor am I. I'm not happy with it, but it's very compelling. What's fascinating to me is that it is inevitable. That if technology advances the way it is currently, within maybe even our lifetime, or within another lifetime, another 100 years, we will most certainly have an artificial reality that's you cannot discern, indiscernible
Yes.
between that and the reality we currently experience.
Yes.
So if that's inevitable, you would kind of assume that perhaps it's already taken place. And if it had already taken place, it would probably be very similar to what we're experiencing. Whereas enough of it seems fake, and enough of it seems scripted, enough of it seems very coincidental how things line up, that it almost does seem like a simulation sometimes.
Well, but there are also things that are strange, but that we could research, that we are doing a very bad job of researching. I got a phone call a couple of years ago from a woman who had been a student at a school, a high-level preparatory school on the East Coast. And I had published a book in the 80s, early 80s, about UFOs, and she was head of a lecture bureau for the kids. And she thought it would be fun to bring me there to talk about flying saucers, because it would excite the students as well.
Sure.
So I went there and I gave a lecture at the level of, but those were very bright students. It was sort of an elite girls' school. And then, she drove me back to the airport, and I went home. Never heard from her again. 35 years pass, and she calls me. And she says, you may not remember me, but I was the one who brought you to give a lecture at the school. Do you ever come to Washington? And I said, I do remember you. And I go to Washington a couple of times a year. And she says, well, I'd like to tell you about an experience I had. And next time you come to Washington, ring me up. And when you're done with your meetings, I'll pick you up and I'll drive you to Dallas Airport. And so I do that. I call her. She picks me up in a very nice Mercedes. And she says, I've never forgotten your lecture. I saw something here on the way to the airport where we're passing now that I'd like to describe to you, because it reminded me of your lecture and I had never heard that anywhere else. There are trees along the freeway on both sides, beautiful. The freeway was dark and the sky was still blue. She said, I saw an elongated object, which was like, to me, twice a 747, with what people would probably think of as portholes or windows. They were just lights along the thing. The thing was elongated, and it was moving slowly, minding its own business. Now, it must be on 10 radars including the airport. And it was moving over, and then The sky was perfectly clear, no clouds, no fog. It blended with the sky. I could just see the outline still. It didn't speed up. I could see the lights, and I could see the lights fading, and then there was nothing there. And I remember in your lecture in the 80s, you talked about things that could be going into another dimension, okay? But I thought that was interesting. You know, the kids thought it was an interesting idea. And yeah, in science, you know, people will talk about different dimensions in physics and so on. But I had never seen it mentioned anywhere else, and there it was. You know, this thing faded from our universe, and I have no idea where it went. But it didn't speed up. So I said, thank you very much. Can I publish that? I said, no way. I'm the CEO of an international commercial company. We work in several countries, and I can't have my name associated with it. Now, I've had probably a dozen cases like that with people from Silicon Valley, people, you know, they report on Wall Street about how their company is doing. They don't want a reporter saying, are you the same guy who sees flying saucers? You know, you're the CEO of this such and such microchip company in San Jose, you know. You know, they don't report it, but they want me or some of my colleagues to know about it because they know it could contribute to the research we're doing. Right. And you know, Dr. Nolan has had that experience as well, as you know. And but it's not going to the Air Force, it's not going to the newspapers, it's not going to the New York Times. Now, if those things can, you know, just jump out of our universe and go somewhere else, that rewrites the whole thing. You know, we're not talking about propulsion the way we think about propulsion. We're not talking about, you know, environmental environment. We're not talking the passage of time, you know, in the same way that, you know, I would experience with my watch and so on. We're talking about something because the rules are different, and we need to go up and start thinking along those rules, or at least the possibility of those rules. It doesn't prove that there is another universe 5 minutes ahead of us, but there could be. And then all the papers that they publish saying there couldn't be flying saucers because there isn't life, you know, closer than, you know, 2,000 light years from us, and it would take, at the speed of light, it would take 2,000 years to come here. Well, there could be another universe 5 minutes ahead of us, and it would take them 5 minutes to get here, okay? Right. So that would explain why we have visitations throughout history, and they look the same throughout history, because, you know, our technology, I mean, this technology of this microphone didn't exist 20 years ago. Right. You know, it's a new microphone. And there were no microphones, you know, 200 years ago, there were no microphones at all. Right. So, how can those things look the same? How can we compare them to something somebody saw in the 18th century? Right, right. That shouldn't happen, you know, unless your technology is stuck. Right, right, right.
Yeah, that is a fascinating aspect of it, right? You would expect that if you thought about how fast our technology evolves, technology from 1947 from some other planet would be exponentially more advanced than what we experienced in 47. Just based on how our technology evolves.
And you have to think, I mean, we think about an aircraft in ways completely different. I mean, there are things that, yes, it came from the Wright brothers and so on. There were speculation before on how you could fly. But what an aircraft does today is radically different. The whole physics is different.
And we're only talking about 100 and some years ago, which is pretty crazy. You go from this thing that Wilbur and Orwell will write, kind of like get it to take some air for a little bit, to the Chinese jet, which is disguising itself from radar and travels at insane speeds, and then the possibility of other propulsion systems that have been kept under wraps.
To the Harrier that stays.
Yes, and then lands like that. Yeah. No, just the technology that we know that we're aware of over the last 200 years is pretty extraordinary. And if you imagine something from somewhere that's had thousands of years to evolve past us.
There are a couple of things I wanted to bring up that are in the book. Well, one is in the book, the other one isn't. What's in the book is I've tried to continue the parapsychology experiments that were done at SRI and now at lots of other places. And I got advice from people who said if you put yourself in certain types of conditions, you could try to manifest another form of intelligence, another form of, essentially an apparition. It's not necessarily related to UFOs, but if you can do that, that would teach you what you could do also with some of the encounters that people describe, that the witnesses tell me. So if I'm a good scientist, I should put myself in their place first and experience it myself. So I did a couple of sort of mental experiments like that in my home. I was alone at the time in my home, and nothing happened. And then nothing like what I expected happened. And then I was asleep one night, and all of a sudden I'm propelled outside of my body into another room, and there is an entity there, a massive sort of rectangular mass, entity, clearly something that knows where it is and is thinking. I'm terrified, not terrified so much of the entity. It's like a sort of black, rectangle. But I'm terrified of being outside my body. I know people do experiments with that. There are people who can do it almost at will. I've never tried to do that, because I've heard, cautions that it's very dangerous, because what if you don't find your way back? So I'm terrified. I find myself back in my body. I I sit up completely terrified, crying, screaming, which is not usual. Because it was just, it really was horrible. Then I rationalized it, the experience wasn't supposed to happen outside of my body. Okay? When people describe entities, like Whitley Strieber describes it and so on, there is a very strong psychic impact. But to me, that was very shocking. It hasn't happened before, and it hasn't happened since. I'm not trying to make it happen, but I wanted to flag it and to get advice mostly from other people.
Did you feel compelled to try it again?
I would try it again.
But you have not yet?
No.
No. I can understand. It was that terrifying. If you woke up screaming.
I want to get counsel from, my peers.
That's like similar to the monolith in 2001, right? Yeah.
Well, there is a scientist I know well in Silicon Valley who also started a number of companies that are publicly traded now, who invented the integrated circuit. His name is Federico Fagin. He's a physicist from Italy, PhD from Italy. He came to Silicon Valley in the very early days of the transistor, worked with the initial teams in those places, and then there was a problem of how can you pack those things together in smaller and smaller places, and he's recognized as the father or one of the 2 or 3 people who invented the integrated circuit. So for a long time he was celebrated in that capacity. What he didn't say is that he had seen the design outside of his body one night, and that he had had multiple experiences outside of his body. Now this is someone, one of the fathers of Silicon Valley. I recognize him as one of my mentors, in venture capital, in high technology investment. But now he started to, he's made enough money that he doesn't care anymore, and he's sort of semi-retiring. He doesn't like what's going on, right now, and it's probably going to go back to Europe. But there are a number of people like that whose names are in the Wall Street Journal or in the New York Times who've achieved something, but you find out that they also had, they experimented. In this case, he experimented systematically with, the ability to go out of his body.
They acquired this information from some other source.
Well,
or a vision.
There isn't much. There are a couple of books mention, steps you can take, but it seems to be pretty much up to the individual. In my case, I certainly wasn't trying to do that. I was precipitated instantly to the place where this being was. There were also a couple of things that I never wrote about, not that I wanted to hide them or was afraid of them, but I wanted to understand the context of it before I did. And I talk about it in this book. In the late 70s, my wife, my first wife, Janine, was a psychologist. We bought a place in the country in Northern California, a place in the redwood forest, because I wanted to re-experience the pleasure of doing astronomy as an amateur, a small telescope and so on. But I don't care. I want to look at the moon. I want to look at planets. I want to look at Magellan clouds, whatever. And so we built this. We had there was a house there, but I built an observatory in the middle of the forest. Our closest neighbor, this was the redwood forest, uncluttered and unspoiled, pretty much inaccessible. If you didn't own the land, you couldn't go cut the trees. So there were some old redwoods there, and the closest neighbor was about 3/4 miles away, 3/4 of a mile away. And I thought, this is going to be like a discontinuity in the forest, and maybe it will attract whatever is out there. And maybe we'll see UFOs. We never did. We owned the place for 18 years. We'd go there with our kids, and it was wonderful. But when they are not every weekend, pretty much, as much as we could. And then our kids grew up and moved away. We moved back to the city. We sold the place. The last night, of course, we had cleaned the place. We were selling it to friends of ours who were Our neighbors had a winery. They wanted to expand the land. We had some flat land they wanted to use for the wine, and they wanted the house. And so the last night, everything has been moved out. My wife is still there because we had a car that was going to be taken back to the city, and she had her car, and she was ready to go. Middle of the night, there's a light that's filling the house. No, by then there are no curtains, nothing. Filling the house, blue, sort of UV, white, blue, ultraviolet light. She goes outside, and the light is making everything clear, the forest, everything else, and it's moving. It doesn't have a specific shape. It's like a mass of light with light all around it. It's going down the driveway, which is a dirt road, to the main road, to the small road. And it's just moving along politely in front of the ranch and down to the street. It has no business being there. No sound. It's not a car. It's not a car on fire. It's not the light again. Everything is all the details are there. You can see the grass. You can see the leaves on the trees. And why that?
Maybe you called for it and it took a long time to get there.
Well, or they just wanted to say goodbye.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they were there the whole time and they just didn't want to show themselves. So let's put on a show for Jacques.
There was one time we used to sleep in the observatory. There was a small bedroom there with old books that I collected. And she woke up and she saw a light that was like what people describe, small light. She didn't see where it came from or where it went. But it was moving along the walls. There were two of them, and then it vanished. She woke me up, but I had not seen it. It was gone by the time I woke up.
I talked to a man when I went to visit Skinwalker Ranch. A few people wanted to talk to us, but then once we brought the cameras out, only one guy wanted to talk to us. And he was very rational, very normal guy who lived in a modest home, and he told the story about this ball of light that entered through his home. And it seemed to be somehow or another aware that he was there. He felt like it was, if not a living thing, controlled by something that was alive. And then it went through the walls and disappeared again. He said it was in his home for a few minutes. It was moving around.
Well, as you know, Mr. Bigelow has done experiments of his own with lights and things like that, putting interesting objects in certain places that are enclosed and seeing if something is going to look around or move them and so on. So very, very interesting.
Well, it's such a fascinating subject, and like I said, I really appreciate all your years of research and the way you're so measured and so objective in your analysis. It really helps people like myself get at least some sort of an understanding of what's going on.
Well, what's important is to have guidelines for research. So
Yes.
I look to some of the people you have here, who've done some other exploring, and try to learn from them and sort of refine my own criteria.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. In your book, again, the one that's available now, this is Forbidden Science 6. This is the 6th of these books. And
Scattered Castles is it's not classified, but it comes from the classified world. It's a repository of classified projects. So if you're cleared at a certain level and you want to know what else is there that you would have access to, or where certain things are being sent to you, and you're authorized to. You could look up the names of those projects. It wouldn't tell you what the project does unless you're cleared for it, but it will tell you that there is a project. And so those names of secret projects are picked by a computer, they're random. And I thought this was funny, scattered castles is sort of like, all these files about strange UFOs and strange creatures.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything. It was great having dinner with you and Hal put off and everything else last night as well. So I really appreciate that.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
The guys today, what's going on, man?
How's it
Yeah,
going?
we were just talking UFC. Yeah, I think this is we were talking about how exciting the Ankalaev and Pereira fight was, even though people didn't like it because it wasn't like some crazy result, a giant knockout like you get in most Pereira fights, but it was so technical. And
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
yes, sir, Michael. Good
Thank
to see
you.
my friend.
Thanks for having me, and really appreciate you showing me around. Wow, what a space you've created, man.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
so cool. Keeps going.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
Josh Dugan. My man. Introduce. That's like, I forget, I think Tony Hinchcliffe told me about you.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, you have to follow Antonio Brown. You must follow. He's the most must follow on the internet. I'm like, really?
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
Well, dude, very nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
So, let's take, first of all, why do we love conspiracy so much? Because I fucking love them.
Dude.
I love them. I love finding out the dirty little tactics and
Right.
secrets and how the government does things and what the fuck's really going on. Why is it so exciting?
I think it's something like deep down in humanity. Is like we love storytelling.
Yeah.
And these days, conspiracy theories are like
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
What's happening, man? Good to see you.
thank you for having me back.
My pleasure. How many times a day do you get bombarded by the whole Bill Burr thing?
When it gets into the family and people I haven't talked to for 20 years,
Then you have to break character and tell the truth?
no, the thing.
Stretched absolutely everything. And I was telling you, I got thrown off a horse in Africa a month ago. And when I was in the process of getting thrown off, and I was like in the middle of the air, and I'm about to come down, and I'm like, oh shit, this is going to be a problem. And I thought about those warm-ups, and I landed and rolled and didn't hurt myself. So
That's really good.
Thought it'd be good for you because we're talking about mind fucks. Cheshire Cat's a little bit of a mind fuck.
In the simulation.
Yeah, for sure. So you were just telling me that you had a brain disease, and what did you do to fix it?
So
What was it? Which one?
it's temporal lobe epilepsy with mesial temporal sclerosis.
When did you develop this?
We don't know, but I started having seizures like a few years ago, and everybody in my family knows I'm a neuroscientist. I'd say with a lowercase n, not a PhD neuroscientist,
But you studied neuroscience.
yeah, and postgrad at Harvard and Duke. But
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Track my name, Joe Rogan Podcast, my name, all day.
Good to see you, my friend.
it's good to be seen. Thank you, Mr. Rogan.
You're taking notes already. already?
I am. He said, "Good to see you." Yeah, I know. I don't know what I do this.
So
right?
tell everybody what you were doing in the Middle East, because it's pretty crazy.
Oh,
Pretty
thank you.
interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, it all started with some colleagues of mine from the UK Special Forces Club, and these guys are tremendous, right? But Howard Leadham and some others who came up with an idea. So we
fund, which is for the UK Special Forces. It's like Wounded Warriors here in the States. But, and I can say this because I'm a dual citizen with the UK, the British don't tend to be very good at raising money or asking for money for very important causes. So here in the US, where you've got 100,000 different groups that are advocating for veterans, over there it's not the case, right? But they have the same need, right? They have all these wonderful people in their families. So the idea was, what can we do? A big event, something massive that can really help to raise funds and awareness for the.
That's bullshit. I never got it until this year, but that's what they say.
That's what they say. You get it within a couple of years, you get it, and then all of a sudden.
Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Good to see you.
You might want to take it easy a little bit.
It's like, dude, you have to follow Antonio Brown. You must follow. He's the most.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Good to see you, my friend.
Good.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Gives advantages to disadvantaged people, and at some point that ability to use the 8A program was granted to Alaska Native corporations. Well, the 8A program is now under attack by some large corporations.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me. It's
My
great
pleasure.
to be here.
Thanks for being here. It is a terrible time for Los Angeles, and unfortunately, you did not win. I wanted you to win.
Thank
I was
you.
rooting for you.
Thank you.
It's just the politics in LA are.
By night, all day.
Okay. Meet the Cosby Kids. Oh my God! Look at this. The thing says.
Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Joe
Good to see you
Rogan,
again.
you're gorgeous.
You are too, you beautiful
Shut up.
bastard. Come on.
Can I read you something?
Oh, okay. You want to read me something?
This is from my son, just
Okay.
before I came on the show. Hi, Daddy. I was wondering if the show...
By night, all day.
Great to have you in, man. How you feeling? You must be feeling.
How are you?
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I wound up seeing you as many people did.
Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Good to see you again, my friend.
Hey, it's always
been a
great to
while.
be here.
It's been a while.
4 years. January 8th. January 15th.
Was it really?
Yeah, how long ago?
Years. Jeez.
Yeah, it's been 4 years.
The last time you were here, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I think the last two.
That was so. That was like right after.
It required just a huge amount of preparation. For people who don't know, maybe I'll lay out where there was opportunities for peace. So since the beginning of the war, February 24th, 2022.
Suggested it over the years, your books, and then I started reading one and got very interested in it. I was like, wow, this is pretty crazy. well, let's just get people to the beginning of My Big Toe. How did you first begin with the research?
Well, actually, it all started while I was.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Steve Brunello.
That was a long exhale.
I needed one.
Is this Trump's chair?
He sat in that chair, yeah.
I want to soak up some of the tenacity, man.
He's got a lot of that.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
My wife, I smoked one of these and I didn't brush my teeth. I woke up the next morning and my wife said, "Your breath is 4-dimensional."
You didn't brush your teeth before you went to bed and you smoked a cigar?
Of course I didn't brush my teeth before I went to bed. Give a fuck. You know what I mean? You're married. She was like, I love you so much. Your breath.
Started pushing for like ideological based censorship. And I think it was two main events that really triggered this. In 2016, there was the election of President Trump.
Trumps the Bible. So they would believe, I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church, is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. And so they have this perspective that there's been things that have been affected. I mean, Joseph Smith made his own translation of the Bible, and it's rough.
And when he was 14.
Well, I think it was later on that he made the Joseph Smith translation. But
really?
I don't even know if the official LDS Church ascribes to the Joseph Smith translation, because I think they even see this is, we know what the Greek and the Hebrew looks like, and this is not even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was, legitimate con man. Yeah, which is fascinating. That it's people have such a deep search for meaning and truth that if you are confident, and which is what a con man is, confidence man. If you are really good at expressing yourself and really you show confidence in your convictions, you can persuade a lot of people.
Yeah, confidence is not competency.
Yes.
And unfortunately, those things get confused a lot.
Well, it covers up for competency sometimes.
Yeah. In religion and politics and all sorts of things, right?
In everything.
Yeah.
In everything. I mean, I think because people want to, it's very difficult to be an expert in a subject. And I think people want to believe that they are, and they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's why, experts themselves feel a lot of inadequacy, is because they study a subject and realize, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this hole.
Right.
So, unfortunately,
most subjects are very, very nuanced and very deep.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about ancient religion.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about things that were a oral tradition for a long time before they were even written down. So it's a long trudge to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah. And part of the whole, what I was trying to get Billy in that conversation that I had with him to get to the bottom of, partly was a question of methodology. I think he got frustrated at me at one point because I kept asking, what are the criteria that you're using when you're looking at one source versus another source and coming up with a conclusion? Because in historiography, it's the inference to the best explanation. And so there are different ways that you go about that, different methodologies. And historians very rarely disagree on the data and the evidence. It's the conclusions that you draw from that. But then there are some things that are just out and out false. And I don't think Billy totally knew what I was talking about, but it's those criteria that we look at when we look at something that does come from an oral tradition and eventually gets written down and becomes a literary text. And then you analyze that on the basis of it being a literary text.
This is sort of the problem between with being self-taught rather than conventionally academically trained.
Definitely.
Where you're trained in very specific disciplines and you're taught to understand the foundation before you understand like how to put a window in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you have to know from the base, from the beginning. Like, do you have a water line? Do you have power? Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things going on when you're trying to construct an expertise in something, especially something that is so complicated. You know, one of the things that I've gotten out of I've probably watched probably 20 hours of your stuff over the last couple of weeks, and you've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual, cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long journey. That's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me, because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road, like really gone down the road, because you don't meet a whole lot of them. You know, I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, you know, some Psalms, but the real, the go all the way to the back, way, and that's what you've done. That's very interesting. So this is like, how old are you?
I'm 33.
Which is very young for someone who has the depth of knowledge that you have. You know, so you've been doing this essentially from that miraculous moment. That ignited this spark, even though you came from a missionary background, and then from then on. So for the past 11 years, 12 years, or 20 years, 30 years, like it's your whole life essentially. It's all been this.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I went to university with full intention of going into the police force. I did like my undergraduate studies, and then I kind of mapped out this plan that I was going to become a police detective, and that was my goal. And I think I realized...
Why that? Because you like getting to the bottom of things?
It could be.
Because you do, right?
Yeah, well...
When someone who spends 21 years like getting to the bottom of a religion, you'd probably be pretty good at cracking cases.
I hope so. I think that might have been part of it. I also... There was an aspect of when I was in high school where they were like, you got to figure out what you're doing. Or you're going to be homeless and you're going to die.
Yeah, like I remember that part.
I felt that like
it was a terrifying
the pressure.
moment in life.
Man, I always tell people when they're in high school, like, you can chill out. Like, it's going to be okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I wonder if it's different now, because
I think you should have a certain amount of desperation.
Yeah.
Because I think that it ignites the fire within you to do something.
There's probably something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that I know that have been too pampered and taken care of and didn't have a fear of everything going completely sideways, they never really get the momentum that's necessary to accomplish things in life.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. I mean, desperation.
A little desperation and fear, I think, is good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wants to be comfortable. I don't think that's necessarily a good path. I mean, I think you should have perspective and you should enjoy your life as a young person and have those, but you should also realize you got work to do.
Well, and stress is good. Right? Stress creates perseverance and creates patterns that allow you to succeed.
Yes.
I mean, this is like athletics 101, right?
I think that's very important.
You got to push yourself. And I think actually part of that also led in, like, I'm a big believer in athletic discipline needs to go hand in hand. I mean, I know you are too. Needs to go hand in hand with any other type of, like, whether it's an intellectual endeavor or like, because it trains you to be able to go into places that are uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that uncomfortability allows you to then become stronger. You know, realize where your inadequacies are. And especially when you're with people who are better than you. I mean, when I was running at York University, there were two guys on our team who, because I was okay individually, but I ran for the relay team. Yes, I was a sprinter. And one of the guys was part of the they medaled when Canada medaled at Worlds. He was part of that relay team. And then my other training partner, Busy, who he ended up competing in Tokyo for Canada. And when you're beside someone who is like just a genetic freak, you're like, oh, okay, like that's different.
Yeah.
Right. And it both pushes you, but it also reveals your limitations, where that doesn't inhibit you. Like, you shouldn't, that shouldn't discourage you to go up to that line of being able to push yourself. But at the exact same time, it creates a realism that, like, I can train as much as I want to, I'm not gonna run like that.
right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but going back to what you were asking, like, I think there was part of that in wanting to go into the police force, but then realizing, like, around my third year of university, that my passions and motivations were very, very different, and that I didn't know how to go about that, or where the proper place to do that was, but I knew that I needed to lean into that to some degree, particularly with the Bible, because I was claiming that this Bible talks about this guy Jesus, and I'm a Christian. So I have a friend, Andy Bannister. He's out in the UK, and he says if you take Christ out of Christian, all you're left with is Ian. And Ian's a great guy who's not going to save you from your sins. And so, like, if I'm wrong about the Bible, those people who push back on me, right, those skeptics of various worldviews, if the things they were saying about the Bible were true, then it did actually legitimately undermine what I believed. And so I needed to take that seriously. I had an obligation to actually investigate those things as far as I could.
Playoffs. We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score 6. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code ROGAN. That's code ROGAN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
What is the oldest version of the Bible, or the stories in the Bible? Is it the Dead Sea Scrolls, or are there older versions?
The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest of the Old Testament. So when they were discovered, so they were discovered in 1946 to 1957. And at that point, during their discovery, they pushed back a lot of our previous oldest manuscripts 1,000 years, which was a big deal.
How old are they?
They're anywhere between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. So it's kind of tricky because the Dead Sea Scrolls they're like a library that we refer to. So it's approximately 970 documents, but it's distributed out between 10,000 and 11,000 fragments. So there's a lot going on there, right? So, and some of these, are so fragmentary that you look at them and it's like confetti. Because they're, 3,000 years old, but not quite that. They're like 2,000 plus years old. Right?
Animal skins too, right?
Yeah, well, all sorts of things. Animal skins, papyri, and then some of them are actually done on copper. Really? They're like inscribed in copper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of the coolest ones. Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom and the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is an ancient treasure map.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Online?
Yeah, Jamie, pull up the... Hey!
There it is. Wow.
Yeah. So it's in Hebrew, and it is wild. So it has these sites where it says buried treasure is found. Whoa. And there have been a number of guys who have tried to look for it. And so...
Does it say where the treasure is?
You know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. But
look how crazy that language is.
I know, right? And so, but the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's like stuff like this. It's papyri, it's animal skins, and it's a number of different languages. So the vast majority of it is in Hebrew, but there's also a lot in Aramaic, and then Greek, and in Nabatean. So it's like an umbrella term to just describe a whole bunch of literature. So a lot of it is biblical because it was written by this group out in the desert called the Essenes, who lived at Qumran. So,
But then other stuff of it is just, it's just Jewish literature of various stripes that were hidden in caves all around the Dead Sea.
So the scrolls, as it were, aren't all biblical. Some of them is just accounting of the times.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie looked it up. 65 tons of gold and 26 tons of silver.
65 tons. That's a lot. That's a lot. How many Cuban links can you make out of that?
You can see why someone would try to track that down.
Boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, like, you have ones like the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is fully complete. Like, it's a copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's a full complete scroll. But then other ones are so fragmentary that we think they're written in Hebrew, but we can't actually tell.
Oh, wow.
Because no one's willing to, like, piece these. And this is true for a lot of stuff. So, the largest grouping of papyri literature in the world is the Oxyrhynchus collection, which we get a good portion of our oldest manuscripts of the New Testament from. But if you go to Oxford and you look at the Oxyrhynchus collection, you pull out that drawer, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you're like,
right.
Like, most of it is untranslated, untranscribed, because the amount of man hours that it would just take to even put it together, never mind then go to the effort of transcribing and translating it. And most people are not willing to do that.
And if you're missing chunks, how do you even make that puzzle connect?
Well, that's part of my area of speciality in research is in regards to that. So I study paratextual features. We're really going to get nerdy today.
Let's get nerdy.
So you look at the features of the manuscripts, not necessarily the words, but things like the spaces between the words, the development of punctuation, indentation or outdentation, and I look at the margins, and I try to, based on the average size of manuscripts in and around that time, and also the average spacing of words and the margins on the top, bottom, and the side, recreate what the manuscript could have possibly looked like.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text, which is in the Middle Ages.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word?
Word for word.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. So if you go to Israel and you go...
Is that papyrus?
Yes. No, I think that one is vellum.
What is vellum?
So I should be more specific. So parchment is animal skin. Vellum can be used synonymously with the term parchment. Technically, parchment is like baby animal skin, like calves or lambs. But this is the Great Isaiah Scroll, and you can see like they stitch together the parchment because it's so long.
God, it's so beautiful. The way they wrote back then was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it's because I can't read it, that it's so fat. Maybe if I saw English, I would think that's beautiful too.
Yeah.
Especially script, like cursive. Cursive is very beautiful. But that is so fascinating because obviously coming from a point of ignorance, the letters look so similar. Like so many of, this is what I always got about cuneiform. When I look at that, I'm like, whoa. It's just one particular sort of character that's this way and that way and up and down and...
Oh, cuneiform is wild.
Weird.
It's really, really tricky. And that's the thing when, like, if you're studying ancient languages and you start to study Greek, like, the Greek alphabet is similar enough that you're like, okay, alpha looks like an A, right? Delta looks like a D. So you can figure it out. And so it tricks you because you start off and you're like, oh, this is phobios, fear. I know what a phobia is. And you get this false sense of encouragement. And then, the further you go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. So, but Hebrew is completely the opposite because the writing system is so different. The learning curve is hard at the beginning. And then you're like, everything is just 3 letters with a suffix added to it. And so it feels like, whereas the opposite is true with Greek. Greek, you're like, I get this. And then when you really go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh crap, none of the things that I learned about that are supposed to be standard, all of them have exceptions.
Wow.
But yeah, cuneiform's a wild one.
Do you know who Rick Strassman is?
No.
He's a scholar, and he did a lot of early work, FDA-approved work on psychedelics. And he spent 16 years teaching himself to read ancient Hebrew.
Nice.
Yeah, so because he wanted to really understand the Bible from the original source of ancient Hebrew, and to understand it in context. Because ancient Hebrew, the way the words are structured, is so different than English, and that something must be lost in translation. So he spent 16 years teaching himself how to read ancient Hebrew. That is that is such dedication. 16 years.
It's a long time. That seems too long.
Well, you're self-taught. I mean, he's doing it himself.
Yeah, self-teaching. Yeah, I self-taught myself Greek at first, and then when I started learning it formally, I realized how much you miss when you self-teach yourself.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, how many people can teach you ancient Hebrew? How many courses are available?
Oh, you can take it at any graduate college.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is it, it's not something that we know what it sounded like, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big debate with ancient languages.
Right.
Like, same thing with, arguably, we don't know how any of this was pronounced.
Right.
I mean, modern Greek speakers get really mad at me when I say that, because they're like, of course we know how it's pronounced. It's pronounced like we pronounce it, right? And on all my videos where I'm like site translating Greek manuscripts, there's so many comments of modern Greek speakers getting mad at how I pronounce things. But realistically, we don't really know how most of the things are pronounced with anything.
But isn't that very bizarre when you're translating? Like, if you go back to, like, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh, we don't even know what the words sounded like.
Yeah.
We kind of know what they represent, and then we do a literal translation of what they represent. But if you've never heard, no one can speak ancient Sumerian.
Yeah. Well, Sumerian's a wild one because it's a language isolate.
What does that mean?
So Hebrew is an Afro-Semitic language. So Hebrew is related to all of these other languages like Aramaic and Akkadian, but language isolates have no adjacent comparisons.
Whoa.
So, because I tried to teach myself Sumerian and I failed, and I just gave up because I couldn't do it, because I had nothing to really compare it to.
Right.
So Sumeriologists are very they're a field of their own, because I learned a little bit of Akkadian because I had studied Semitic languages, and there's enough crossover between things like Hebrew and Aramaic and Akkadian, but Sumerian you have nothing to compare it to. And
what did it eventually become?
It just died.
It just died?
It just died.
How? Do we know?
I mean, the Sumerians lost to the Assyrians, and the Assyrians got taken over by the Babylonians. I mean, it's just the course of history where things happen. But there are a number of ancient languages that are language isolates, like Linear Elamite. We had no idea what Linear Elamite even said until 2021.
Oh, well, I never even heard it until 5 seconds ago.
I know, there you go. Jamie, if you pull up, if you look up, what's it called? There's a cup, a silver cup. It'll come up if you Google image Linear Elamite, because you think cuneiform looks wild. Linear Elamite is completely different than that too. And there's a silver cup, which we had no idea what it said, and then a bunch of researchers, ancient Near Eastern researchers, developed. Well, so let's in the corner there, that one on
far left corner.
Oh no, here now it's moved because you clicked it. That one, yeah, click that. So that's Linear Elamite. And so that's in and around the same time that languages like Sumerian. So there's this very interesting kind of, if we're talking about a story in the Bible like the Tower of Babel, where it says that God confused their languages and everybody started speaking different languages, you have these languages that just pop up and out of nowhere and have no relation to one another. So Akkadian starts to adopt certain words in Sumerian, but they're still Sumerian words. It's like pizza is Italian, right? Or like kayak is Inuit. But when you're looking at the words that carry over, it's not because they're there's a relationship between Akkadian and Sumerian. It's because you have these cultures that live side by side, and eventually Akkadian starts to adopt these things. But Sumerian is, so that's why when I see people like Billy Carson talk about being able to read Sumerian, I'm like, dude, I read ancient languages and I can't. I've tried and I can't make heads or tails of Sumerian.
Yeah.
So
that's a tell.
Unfortunately, it kind of gives away.
Listen, I like Billy. He was a nice guy. I really enjoy talking to him. I really do. I think his videos are fun. But I also think truth is important.
I have no problem with him as an individual.
He just needs to course correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, course correct and recognize what you know and what you don't know. And that you're not doing people a service, especially people like myself that aren't educated in this. Like we turn to others who claim to have vast knowledge of this to help me out. Tell me what's going on. When I sit down and talk to you, tell me what's going on. And if you don't really know, you're fucking over a lot of people, unfortunately, for yourself.
Yeah.
This how do you say it again? Linear Elamite. Can you put that back up again, Jamie? So this was in 20. Can you show me that image that you showed me before?
Actually, see if you can find the cup.
That's pretty dope, right?
If you scroll, there should be a cup. I think it's called the dashed.
Is that it in the lower corner?
No,
it's not the cup.
No, if you guys, it's got. Yeah, if you look up cup, that guy. So see that inscription at the top beside the face?
Yeah.
So that's the one. So it goes around the top of the cup, and they cracked that.
Look at that dude's honker.
He's got a big nose, isn't he?
That's a hell of a nose.
Yeah, he can smell that linear element. And so actually, interestingly enough, if you pull back, Jamie, that's my so there's an infographic that I made that just popped up. So if you click that guy, that's the one I made. Why is it coming up like that? Okay.
So is it just bad resolution? Is it what you're saying? Oh, there it is.
Oh no, this is mine.
That's
So actually, here, I'll be self-serving. If you go to wesleyhuff.com,
that is so. Can we just look at that for a second? That is so cool. And how old is this?
20th century BC.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 4,000 plus years ago.
Yeah. So if you go, Jamie, to wesleyhuff.com and then click my infographics tab at the top. So I started making these things for the graduate students I was teaching. And so if you go down, there should be an archaeology section. And in the archaeology section, I have that one on, I'm blanking on what it's called. I make ones for manuscripts too.
What a great website you've got.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
This is awesome. It's so detailed.
Yeah, so there's the linear Elamite one.
What a fucking phenomenal resource this is.
Right there.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, Marv Dash. That's what it's called. So yeah, you see that. So I have Sumerian, linear Elamite, Akkadian, and Paleo-Hebrew there at the bottom, the comparisons. And these are languages that operated like alongside one another, but are almost completely foreign to one another. So there is crossover between Akkadian and Paleo-Hebrew.
So that's interesting. Sumerian, when I'm thinking of cuneiform, I'm not thinking of that, right? That looks different than some of like the clay scrolls, the imprintations that they make with a clay wheel.
Yeah, well, it's all done with the stylus. So it's like a little wedge stylus. So there are different variations of it, but ultimately it's done with the stylus. The thing that's interesting, like you're probably thinking more of what that later Akkadian looks like, right? Where it's like the wedges.
Yeah.
So Akkadian basically borrowed the writing system. And it had development over time, but is very close.
So when they conquered them, did they have their own writing system initially and just incorporated Sumerian writing to theirs?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. But
God, I'd like to know.
I know, right?
I mean, it's so long ago, but not,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so long ago in terms of a human life.
Yeah.
But it's not that long when you think, like, we went from 4,000 years ago to that to large language models.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, quantum computing.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at language systems develop. Paleo-Hebrew turns into what we saw in the Dead Sea Scrolls, whereas Paleo-Hebrew is a little bit different than what we eventually see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's like a development within the language. And then modern Hebrew adopts the Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but modern Hebrew has vowels that were developed in the Middle Ages to figure out how to pronounce it. Because basically, ancient Hebrew
doesn't have a vowel system in its writing that's overly comprehensive. And so in the Middle Ages, when you have these groups of Jews who are copying these Hebrew scriptures, who aren't speaking it as much as they're reading it, you got to figure out how to pronounce it, as because vowels make a difference. But if you took all the vowels out of English, if you were a natural English reader, you could probably figure out what was what if you're looking at the page. And so in the Middle Ages, the Masoretic scribes come up with these vowel pointing systems, and that's what you see when you like look at a Hebrew Bible today, is you see these vowels. And sometimes like the introduction or removal of the vowel is significant in the changing of the words.
It's also interesting, and you know, we're kind of seeing language change, written language, while right now in this current era because of the we've kind of abandoned cursive.
Yeah.
Right? So if people in the future go to read ancient scripts of human beings that lived in the 20th century, they'll be like, what is this shit?
Yeah.
And then, you know, if there wasn't a lot of it, like there's no cursive on the internet. I mean, there's cursive on the internet, but I mean, no websites are written in cursive. Or very few
printed.
At least. It's all printed.
Yeah.
And so they've essentially in school stopped teaching. Most classes don't teach cursive. Like we all learned cursive as children. It was the way you could write things quicker.
Yeah.
And then once printing and typewriters and computers became ubiquitous, like it's gone.
Yeah.
And everybody's just texting.
Yeah. Well, let's hope people in the future are still able to read the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
Like because that's what it was written in, right? Stuff like that.
That's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were not taught that, and then you went to read that and you said, this is English, like, what are you talking about? Like, I recognize a few of these letters, but it's so vastly different than the printed text.
Yeah. Language models are wild.
Wild.
Yeah.
The whole thing is wild that people figured out how to associate sounds with little symbols, and then they did completely different shit in Korea, completely different shit in Russia.
Yeah.
Like it's so fascinating. And then you have to have these experts who can translate these things, and you're dependent upon them forever, which that was what Lutheranism was all about, right? Like Martin Luther wanted to have phonetic translations of the Bible, and there was a lot of resistance to that because the people that knew how to read Latin were like, hey, slow down.
Yeah, partly. I mean, there were proto-reformers before Luther.
Were there
guys
really?
like Wycliffe. So John Wycliffe and William Tyndale both translated the Bible, or parts of the Bible, into English, and they predated. I mean, and they weren't very popular for it either. I mean, Wycliffe was declared a heretic, and then his body was exhumed and burned because of the work that he did. But yeah,
burned him after he was already dead.
Yeah, well, Tyndale's line was that he wanted, I believe it was Tyndale. It was either Wycliffe or Tyndale. My friends who are specialists in this are going to get mad at me for this. But one of those two guys said that they wanted the plowboy to be able to read the Bible and know it as well as the priests. And so that was their motivation, is that they're like, you know, public education for literacy in these areas was largely because they just wanted people to read the Bible. But that was a big motivation behind Luther, was he's like, I'm going to translate this thing to German. Because part of his kind of kicking off of what we call the Protestant Reformation was that he read the Bible in Greek. Because there was a guy named Desiderius Erasmus who was they call them humanists, but it means something different than now. Humanists were like scholars who were trying to figure out the entirety of human knowledge up until that point.
Wow. Like
Renaissance men, kind of, right? So Desiderius Erasmus is like one of the last true Renaissance men. But he was compiling, and he produced the first printed edition of the Greek New Testament. And so he comes out with this printed edition of the Greek New Testament, and Luther gets his hands on it. And so he's reading that, and he notices that in Matthew's Gospel, the word that's in the Latin is penitentium agite, do penance. In Greek is metanoite, which is repentance. And the church was using this as like, you need to do penance. You need to, you know, do all of this stuff to show that you're sorry. And part of that was, you know, paying the church. And Luther reads this and he goes, hey, guys, this means something different. This means repentance. It means changing your mind. It doesn't mean like to actually do things. And so part of his motivation is like, the Latin isn't
reflecting, at least at the point that Latin had developed in that day, like maybe when Jerome translates the Latin Vulgate back in the 4th century, and it's called the Vulgate because Vulgata means like regular. Like you think of vulgar, right? It's just the regular people language. Part of the reason was that in the 4th century, very few people were reading Greek. They were reading Latin. And so they're like, hey, Jerome, you need to produce a Bible in Latin because nobody can read the Bible anymore. And so he produces the Latin Vulgate, and ironically, by the time you get to Luther, 1,000 years later, no one can read Latin, and they're all using the Vulgate.
Wow, that is fascinating. Wow.
And even Erasmus was, so he dedicates his first few editions to the Pope because he knows that the Pope is going to get wind that he's producing Greek New Testaments, and the church is using the Latin, and he's risking his life. So if he dedicates it to the Pope, maybe the Pope will take it easy on him.
Did it work?
Yeah, it did.
Nice, little flattery.
Yeah, see, it goes a long way.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Is that you're dealing with these priests, you're dealing with human beings. And when human beings are the sole purveyors of truth, that becomes a problem. It's power. It's too much power. Most people suck at power. They're just, it just makes them drunk with it, and they abuse it, and you see that in many, many religions. You see that in cults.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, is the best example of it, because, you know, like when you know the person who created this thing, and you know this person is fucking insane, and you have a bunch of people that follow them,
they're just looking out for your best interest, Joe.
Yeah.
Right? They just want to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Did you see Wild Wild Country?
Oh, yes.
It's fucking awesome.
Unfortunately.
It's so good.
Oh,
it's
man.
so crazy. I mean, I'm so glad I wasn't there and a part of it, but they all look good in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really wild. All these cult documentaries, all these exposés, in the beginning, like, these people haven't made. They're all eating together, and they have community, and they're praying together, and they seem
they're just seeking
wonderfully
enlightenment.
happy. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ways my wife and I bond, we have very different tastes in movies, but there's enough crossover that our guilty pleasure is cult documentaries.
I love them.
They're so interesting.
I love them because there's something about people like absolutely believing things that's so appealing to me. I don't know why that is. Like, I like watching Islamic scholars speak, you know, with like full confidence that their version of truth is truth. I'm just interested in that mindset. I think it's a very deeply cut groove in the human psyche that people can fall into. And when there's a cult, it's like, God, it's so obvious. Like, there's the guy. That's the guy. Like, here's a good example. There's a documentary called Holy Hell.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And you know that?
Yeah.
I bought the building that Holy Hell was, like, the actual theater that this guy had built. It's a beautiful theater that he had his followers build so he could dance in front of them. That was going to be the Comedy Mothership, the first version of it.
That's crazy.
So I was under contract for that building, but it fell apart. Thank baby Jesus. Thank somebody. Thank Allah. Thank somebody. And then we found this new place on 6th Street. But that documentary is so fascinating because you can see this guy who is a gay porn star and a hypnotist
so wild
take a bunch of really lost people and send them down this crazy road, and then eventually it all falls apart.
You know what's interesting about that is I have less of a problem with the objective truth claims and more of a problem with them saying, but don't look into it. Like, don't test it. Like, what I say goes, and you're not allowed to explore it. Like, talking about the Mormon Church, they recently did this thing where they're like, you don't need to go on the internet, and you don't need to, and it's
don't
like,
watch
guys,
the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, guys, I don't think you realize what you're sounding like when you come across in that way.
Mormons are the nicest cult members. They're the nicest people. They really are so nice. I love them. I mean, Mormons that I've met have been so friendly. They're so family oriented.
It's true.
It's like really easy to like think these are great people. I'll join them.
We know why they're family oriented, right?
Why?
Is because in what Joseph Smith wrote, there's an idea that everybody's soul pre-exists, and you were born as a spirit child in a previous life. And the reason you need to have children is you need to bring those people's souls into existence. And so there's like, because you have a heavenly father and a heavenly mother.
and you're all children of God in the actual like physical sense, and that the pursuit is exaltation, where you will be a